Okay, so I'm going to do a nice loose dahlia flower. I've got a drawing that I've loosely drawn out. I'll pop this on my community page on YouTube, and I've taken a photo of the actual flower I've taken from the garden to have a go at. So I'll pop those both on the community page so you can print them off. And we're going to go nice and loose, so straight in with some water. I love it when these flowers start to come out, they're really vibrant. And so I'm going to show you a good couple of techniques today. Okay, so I've loaded my brush up with water. I'm coming into some lemon yellow. So I'm just going to get a little bit of a background colour. Chosen this one because it's quite a nice complementary colour to the dahlia itself. And it's nice and light as well. I've also got some permanent rose. So I'm going to pop some of that on. I don't mind if this colour goes further. This is this background underpainting layer, and I quite like this to happen in the looseness. So it indicates quite a lot of movement in here, and I quite like that. So I'm going to just swirl it around a little bit. I've also got a tiny bit of cadmium red deep. So this is just to give it a little bit more oomph around the flower. Remember, this is just underpainting. And then I've got some Windsor violet. This will help to develop some tone in here. So I'm hitting one side of the petals on a lot of these, and like the underside here. So I want that to be nice and dark. I'm also going to load my brush up and do some splattering. So I'm hitting the side of my hand. Okay, because I want to preserve the centre for yellow, I'm just going to use a bit of kitchen towel, and I'm just going to dab that a little bit away because I want to keep that dry. Okay, so I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's nicely dry now. I'm going to come into each of the petals. I'm going to try and hold the flower up so I can see a little bit better. This is around number 10, and I'm just starting to wet some of the petals. Now I can do a few at the same time because I'm quite practiced at doing this, but if you were doing it, I would say stick to doing one at a time till you know you can get through more. So the first colour I'm coming in with is permanent rose, and I want to try and leave a little bit of light. So on each of these I'm leaving an area that's got a bit of light still in it. It's still got colour underneath, but I'm not taking the paint everywhere. And then as I come towards this centre, I'm just going to break into it a little bit. Going to do a little bit of shadow with the violet. So this is, I'm keeping all to the same side. And what's really nice is if you can get lots of shadow in around the centre, because that's going to help that centre stand out. And I've got these little jaggedy bits happening. I'll pick up my round number 10 again. I'm going to come in and do another couple of petals. I don't want to hit a petal that's next to another one because I want them to dry first. Otherwise I won't get a nice edge to each of these petals. So this is a rose coming in again. So it's quite therapeutic doing flowers because you can just take your time and you get a really nice repetitive process to follow. So this has got an overlap of a petal over the top. Then I'm coming into the violet. And again, getting it right in towards the centre. Nice and dark. Pick my round number 10 up again. So you can very quickly make your way round and get a really nice flower shape. Especially if they're not touching one another. And that dark violet coming in again, that centre. Because you're using the neat paint, if you don't put too much water on your brush and sweep it through, it does tend to stay put, so you can do some veins on the petals with it as well. I've got a dry mark there, so the way to do that is to just get a damp brush and just come over, and that will pick that dry mark out. Just going to bring a bit of a stem in the violet. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. That's nicely dry, so we're just going to carry on. So with my round number 6 now, I'm going to come in and start to wet these petals that are behind, so I can finish those ones off. The ones that are behind tend to be a bit dark because you don't necessarily have to keep the light in them. And you're probably going to take a little bit more shadow on in most of them as well. So I'm just coming round with the rose. First of all, then I'm going to come into the violet. Remember, you're probably going to need a little bit more of this violet in there. So load it up. It's going to help them to the other ones to stand forward, especially if you get that edge. Really nice and effective. And then I've also got one here, so I'm just going to pop a bit of rose into that one. And a little bit of violet because I want it to stand forward, and it's very similar otherwise, so that will just help it stand forward. Check if I've got any of these into the centres. I'm just going to run a bit of violet down that bit there as well, so that holds that together. And then I've got an edge here, which is the underside of a petal, and a little bit of one here. So I'm just going to run a bit of violet on there, and then I've got a damp brush, and I'm just going to wet the edge of the violet. That's going to give me an underside. So I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so that's dried really well. And I've got a little bit here of gold ochre. Any sort of vibrant yellow for that centre is useful. So it's quite vibrant. And then we need a colour that's quite dark. So if I take a bit of the violet and a bit of the red together, should get a really dark centre. I'm starting at the centre and dotting it in. I want it to blend into the ochre mix, but I don't want it to go too far. So if it goes too far, you're just going to push it back. So this is a clean damp brush. Push it back. It's just learning how wet the paint is before you do it. And being able to control it in that way is really useful. So what I'm going to do now is some glazing to really brighten up the flower. So if I take some of the red into some of the rose, and take a tiny bit of the violet, I'm trying to get a similar sort of colour. So at the minute it's quite light, and this glazing just brings it all to life and makes it really vibrant. Just bit by bit I'm taking that violet in, and I just want to be able to pretty much colour match. If you control it on your brush and take it bit by bit, you should be able to get there. That's not bad at all. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a bigger brush, pop a bit of water into the mix, and I'm going to start one side and work my way round. And I'm just coming on to dry and glazing each petal. You've got to be a little bit careful, you don't want to go over your edges. And this is just going to give some oomph to the flower. You should still see the other layers. As it dries, they will show from underneath. You can leave some of the petals lighter and some of them darker, that does work. You can glaze in two colours as well, so you can glaze some petals in a rose, some petals in a darker colour, for instance. This is giving it oomph. You can only really do this with a decent cotton paper, and it must always be dry, and you can do as many layers as you want to do. So you can really carry on and just build those layers up. And if you think a layer looks too dull, then you add something brighter into the next layer, and that's called glazing. Every layer you put on, it must be totally dry. Okay, I'll dry that off. So that layer's worked to add a little bit of depth, but it needs more, and I think it needs more vibrancy. So I've gone back to rose. I've popped in a bit of water, and I'm going to come round again, but I'm going to add a layer of rose on now. So you're going to see the difference that this makes in vibrancy. It's that whole thing about me saying how you can just layer and layer, and a depth of flower like this needs these layers. And as this dries, this should be about the right colour then. Very slightly come over the yellow there. So I think the best way to tackle that is a bit of tissue, because the rest of this is dry, and just dab that off. If it doesn't quite come off, a little bit of water, because permanent rose is quite staining, just to get that off. And you're just building up. Painting on to dry again. This should be my final layer. So it's 3 layers to get that same oomph of colour, that same boldness. So there we go. I think that's pretty much of a similar colour match now. So if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'll pop a link to another flower tutorial here and a playlist for flowers, so you can have a look at some more simple flowers.